welcome back to this Shipper Update. I'm Zach Strickland here with Tony Mulvey, who I believe is going to give us an update on the consumer.
Yeah, so now I know Craig got into GDP, and that was the big headline number this morning. Right. This is more of kind of looking backwards, right? We've got some of this credit data, and the consumer, we talk about with all the stimulus that we've seen over the past, or in 2020 and 2021, we talk about the consumer balance sheet being as strong as it ever was, right? And you can see that here. So in the blue line, we've got total revolving credit outstanding, and that's really, you think credit cards, things like that. And then in the green line, we've got that non-revolving credit. So really your mortgages, your car payments, things like that. And what you see, that's really stable. Stable growth right in that 5% range year over year. So this is the year over year changes. And what you see, when we get to 2020, boom, kind of a drop off, right? So you had to think not so much spending, and I mean, you're having that stimulus package really improving those balance sheet, and that's why you see that declining year over year growth throughout 2020 and really into 2021. And really, it kind of changed, right? We started to see that year over year change kind of happen there in July, right? And you think July of 2021, very different than what July of 2020 was, right? But I think what's really interesting is this acceleration in the growth, right? I mean, we're up almost 10% year over year, right? And you think about this is February. Granted, we had in March we saw kind of this. We saw that in another stimulus package last year, right, come out. We haven't seen that data come, that year over year data. But I guess my biggest concern really is seeing this growth is the consumer going to overextend themselves, right? There's no backing now that they had from the government in the past 2 years, right? And if you look, this growth is higher than at any point it has been in the last 5 years. So it's like, where's the consumer? I mean, we've seen it in retail sales and things like that, and then the inflation side. But now you're starting to talk about extending on credit card debt, basically. And it's like, if you're having to spend on a credit card for like necessities like gas and food and even rent.
And that's a big part of this now, is the gas and things that are not necessarily as, they're not consumer goods, especially those that are watching are very concerned about freight. And something to take away too. I mean, the growth rate is off of a lower number. So you have to keep that in mind. But your point is valid in terms of, is the consumer starting to, they've kind of grown addicted to being able to spend money because they've had it for a while. Now they're starting to spend it more on services. Obviously more on gas and things like that. Food, of course, it's starting to erode what they had built up over the course of the pandemic. So I guess your question is, where do they just stop spending?
Yeah, exactly. And that'll actually bring us to our next chart, kind of tying into retail sales, right? So here's non-store retail, so that e-commerce, right? We talk about this boom. And what we see in the blue line, it's just total non-store retail sales. The green line is a regression line that goes back from 2011 through 2020, right? Pretty steady. I mean, we're really close to that regression line. Well, then 2020 happened. We start the same month. That's a lot steeper of an increase. But we've seen really that slowdown. I mean, we're talking about a 6.4% month over month decline. Month over month decline in non-store retail, and that's not adjusted for inflation. So, I mean, you're really seeing this e-commerce, what we saw was a boom, really start to slow down.
Yeah, I love this chart right here because it shows you what the pandemic did to e-commerce is it really just accelerated something that was already in play. And then, my big takeaway here, you can see this regression line right here. This thing is probably going to potentially, it's got some room to correct even further back down to this rate of growth that we saw before because that's really all it did. And potentially, if people are not spending money on goods anymore, we might see a little bit of a bubble pop here and it might actually flatten out even beyond this.
And that's kind of the issue. I mean, it's just it grew so fast that it's not sustainable, right? It was sustainable when services and things like that weren't open, but once you kind of shift, right, and you see it in the GDP numbers, that personal consumption led by increase in services, offset kind of by a decline in goods. And guess where one of the first places we're cutting back on is that e-commerce.
Well, they bought everything. They bought everything last year. Now they're starting to spend money on trips, travel, gas. and things like that. So to me, this is a very telling chart, and it shows me that, you know, Craig's got a lot of valid points here.
Exactly.
A lot of these goods may not necessarily, consumers may not want them, and then we're going to have a lack of availability, but that's still going to create a lot of these bottlenecks.
Yeah, and it's important. This is March data, right?
Yeah.
We haven't seen the impacts that in April where we've seen this further softening, and really don't know what the inflation rate's going to be when that comes out there in the middle of May.
Time to pay the piper, it looks like, a little bit here. Well, thank you so much, Tony. We're going to toss to a quick break, but we will be right back.